Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Kirk, can you bring up the next slide? Oh. This is our usual sort of summary slide about who we are and what we provide. I think probably many of you have already been on our webinars before, so I won't spend much time on this chart. We'll just go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so today what we want to do is talk a little bit about our new toolkit release, version 2.0.0, which is now available on our website, and I suspect that some of you may have already downloaded it and have started using it. Officially, this toolkit release is currently in beta release mode, which means that we expect that it should work just fine. We encourage you to use it and make use of it, but you probably want to hold off putting it into your production environment until we deem it ready to be production worthy, which we expect, based on the testing that we've done and the feedback that we've gotten, will be no later than the end of January next year, 1/31/2012. So please feel free to download it and test it. And if you have any feedback, of course, use the usual channels, either with our forum or our commercial support ticket system, to let us know about things that you see that you'd like to have fixed or improved. Okay, so we're going to start today's discussion talking about some of these features in general, and then after we're done with that, we're going to talk about two topics in a little bit more detail. The first one is going to be talking about some new scripts that we've provided, some new shell scripts that we're providing in our release to make the business of doing file transfers from COSI SFTP and batch much simpler and much easier to administer. And so we're going to explain how that works and how we recommend that you start using these scripts to in your business to help clean up the maintenance and administration. And then finally, we're going to complete the webinar talking about a new feature that actually was introduced in version 1.10.0 of COSI, but is also, of course, in version 2.0.0, where we've introduced a feature for doing file and dataset name pattern matching to help set file transfer options automatically. And we'll take you through some of the details there and the configuration file setup to enable this file name pattern matching. So with that, let's go ahead and start looking at some of the features in the toolkit. One of the changes that we've made is that we've added to our SMF recording. I should point out, that COSI has had SMF recorded for quite some time, and we record FTP-style SMF records, 119 records, subtypes 3 for the client, subtype 70 for the server. We've been doing that for a long time with COSI, and those continue to stay as they were before. But with this new release 2.0.0, we've introduced two new subtypes, subtype 192 and 193 of the SMF 119 record. And these subtypes are now used to carry informational messages from the COSI SFTP log to SMF if you choose to have them logged. So for example, any message coming out of COSI SFTP, either from the client or server side, at the informational level or above, will be written to SMF. And we have some details about how this works in Appendix D of our user's guide, which is available on the website. So if you want to look at the layouts and consume these messages for whatever purpose, you're welcome to do that. This feature was put in at the request of a couple of our managed file transfer folks that are using COSI SFTP with their products, and they are using these records to integrate into their reporting facilities, so they actually look pretty nice. In addition, we've introduced a new internal utility program called SSH Socket Info, which is invoked automatically by Cozy SFTP, the client, when you start up your session, to obtain completely accurate local and remote host and port information from the child SSH process that's used for the transport of the data between your remote host and ZOS. We introduced this program because we were using a best guess estimate for figuring out this information, but it wasn't always completely accurate. So we wanted to make sure that we had correct information, exactly correct information to put into the SMF 119 records. Now, this utility program marks a fairly small departure from our policy of not shipping APF authorized code. And I want to first of all say that it's perfectly acceptable for you not to have any APF authorized version of or any part of Cozy be APF authorized, and you don't even need to APF authorize this utility program. And if you don't, you still get the old traditional behavior with your SMF records. But if you want this accurate host and port information, you'll need to make sure that this single, simple utility program is APF authorized. And the reason it needs to be APF authorized is because we use IBM's NMI interface for collecting this information, and that requires authorization. So it should be completely transparent. The installation guide talks about what needs to be done, what authority you need to have to install the product with APF authorization for this small program. So you can read the installation and decide whether or not you want to do that. So that's it for the SMF features, and I'm going to turn over to Kirk. He's going to talk a little bit about EAV support.
Hi. So one of the sort of big feature items in the new 2.0 release is that we've filled out the support for transferring data sets in Cozy SFTP that are on EAV volumes. So this would include sequential data sets that are PS-E. That support, of course, is in ZOS 1.12. So if you have 1.12, with this release you can have physical sequential data sets that have huge numbers of cylinders above the cylinder managed space, above the line of the volume, and we will handle that correctly. Now, I would like to say that we sort of got most of this for free, because the actual I/O in Cozy Toolkit and SFTP is done. We use the C library to do the I/O, and the C library supports these data sets. But what it doesn't do is we have ZOS specific code that does some things like calculates the space or makes an estimate of the space used by a data set for transfer purposes. And also we have support for listing data sets in in a style like ISPF 3.4. You can use Cozy SFTP to list the data set attributes, and that makes estimates of this stuff. So we had to make sure that we had all the support for the new format 8 and 9 DSCBs in there. In addition, to fill this out, we added new allocation options. These are the BPXW Dyn options that we support in Cozy SFTP for doing dataset allocation. So you can specify as an option that you want not only a library, a PDS, but you can also specify the new types: large, XREC, XPref, and basic. As we go along, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, and we'll either handle it in line or otherwise, but I'll just go ahead and plow through this otherwise, if you don't have any questions. So the next thing we want to talk about is this idea of best practices for using the Cozy SFTP client in a batch job. And I'm going to divert from the slides a minute and just go over to a 3270 session, if I can. And and show you this, show you an example. Now, the first thing I want to show you is our old example, the old sample JCL that we used to provide. We still provide. This shows you how to run. This is the traditional way that we've always showed you how to do this. And let me scroll down to this. This is a job that uses the Cozy SFTP client in a batch job to do a transfer. It downloads a data set to this DD. Now I want to point out a couple of things because I think we have some confusion oftentimes with what's what. This program, this MBS utility program, Cozy Batch, really has nothing to do with SFTP. This is our utility that is a replacement for BPX Batch that allows you to just run Unix shell script in a batch job. And one of the more notable things that we have provided is that you can put the shell script just in line in a data set or in a DD asterisk. You can put these shell scripts in here in line like this. So this has nothing to do with SFTP, but this is our shell script utility for batch. And what we've done in this example is we kind of it's more or less self-contained. We had an example where we would set some shell variables, where your installation directory was and what remote user and host you wanted to connect to, some options about what code page you wanted, and then the name of the remote file you wanted to download. And then there was a bunch of other options, like in this example, we showed you how to set, this is the SSH ask pass variable, which Ported Tools SSH will use to call this program, which is something that we supply as shell script, that'll read your password from the data set pointed to by this variable. So this is sort of a roundabout way of getting a password into Ported Tools SSH. And then there were some other things you had to do. You had to set display none. You had to set this SSH option, and then that kind of thing. So it gets to be kind of a lot of stuff in here. In addition, we have variables where we build up a string of Ported Tools SSH options, connect timeouts and stuff like that. And these are the kinds of things you might envision that would be, you want all your batch jobs to have. And then there's some things that are, based on whether I'm using password authentication or not, you would have this stuff. It all starts to get a little bit messy. Finally, down here, we've got all these variables set, and what we do is we actually execute the Cozy SFTP client. So this is the Unix binary, the shell command for running Cozy SFTP, passing in the options, and then connecting to this remote user in this server. This, of course, is, if you're familiar with shell scripting language, saying I want to read input commands to this command up until I hit the string EOB. So these two commands are passed in. This sets some local options. Here's that server code page from up here. And then we do a get command to this DD, right? So it's instructive as an example because it shows you sort of the gory details of everything that needs to be done to do it. But it has some problems. Let me go back to the some of the shortcomings of this approach. First of all, as I mentioned, common settings are repeated in every job if you take this approach. We had some of those SSH settings that were common, and it exposes, which in some levels is instructive, but in your production environment, it may not be a good idea to expose this shell script, some of these gory low-level details to in your jobs, especially to people who don't know Unix shell scripting. The short of this is this can explode into, if you have hundreds or thousands of these jobs, it can become a maintenance problem. You might want to go back and change some of the common options, and then you have all these jobs you need to change. So it can quickly get out of control. The new sample that we have involves not only some JCL. Let me go back and show you that. And I'm even going to run this. So SFTP SAMP. So this is some sample JCL. It actually has multiple steps. Let me go down and show you just one example. There's actually multiple examples in here. Here's one example, and then let me get rid of these other examples for now. So this is the new way example that we have that we think sort of solves some of those shortcomings, those problems that we have. In this example, we have a sample proc called SFTP proc. I'll show you that in a second. Then the input to this is some variables that we have defined in this script. In this example, we're going to use not a password but a SAF certificate. This is the name of the key ring and the name of the label. The remote user ID and host that you want to connect to. Any options that you want to set for Cozy SFTP client, you can put comma-separated options here. You could actually build up this variable iteratively. The name of the local file and remote file. And then what it does is, beyond just setting some variables, we dot in this sample script, sftp_get.sh. I'll show you where this variable comes from later, because you'll notice I don't set it up here. But what happens is that this sample script that we provide takes all these variables and makes a connection and does a get, downloads a file from this remote file, Etsy profile, to this local file, which happens to be pointing to a DD card that's in my step. Let me show you for a second the proc, SFTP proc. This proc, as you might guess, what it does is we just execute the Cozy batch, which is the Unix shell script tool that runs the shell script in batch. But we do a couple of things, and the first thing we do is that normally the input to your shell is DD standard in. But what we've done here is we have a concatenation between a data set which you configure in the proc by default, which is SFTP IND, which means installation defaults. So this member of this sample has installation defaults, and then it points to a DD name SFTP in, right, which is dummied out. So if I go back to my sample, I'm going to flip the screen back. I'm using SFTP in to point to this input, but in fact that gets concatenated behind the installation defaults. And if we look at the installation defaults, I've configured these. This is what we kind of send you. Mostly it's comments that have some configuration variables that you need to set, like where is your Cozy bin default directory for bin, where are the sample scripts that you want to use, because we have them shipped in the product, but you might want to customize them in your own location. And then you might want to set standard SFTP options for your installation here. So this gets processed first. It just sets some variables in the script, and then your SFTP in follows right here, starting off with setting more variables and then just dotting in the name of this sample script. So let me go ahead and show you that. I'm going to go ahead and run this. We also have some other example. Here's an example of a put. I'll go ahead and submit this while I'm talking. Here's a put. The main difference is we call a script called put, so that when the script runs, it generates a different command. It reverses the L file and R file, it uses a put command. The other thing that we've done is that we just, instead of saying cert, we say pwdsn and we point to the dataset name. Just the fully qualified dataset name. Nothing. We don't need slashes or quotes or anything. Just a little more simple here. And we handle the rest in this shell script. So this is another example. The second step does a put. The third step, this is a little bit trickier one. A couple of our users have requested to be able to remotely download a pattern of file names and then concatenate them all to a DD. So this shell script kind of does that. If you're curious on how that works, you can look into it. It actually makes two connections. One gets the list of file names, and the other, does gets for all those, concatenating into this DD. And then the last one in here does a con. So it's actually much simpler. in this case we're using assert again, but we just give the name of the user and the host. We run this connect script, but then we provide with a here document, that's what this less than thing is called, we provide our own input command. So I could put any input commands that I wanted in here. This just does an ls-al to the home directory. But I could put, as much as I wanted in here. This is, the idea with this is you can still kind of avoid writing scripts to do all the connection and stuff like that, but you can just have your own commands. So let me switch over and show the output of this. Oh, good. We got all zeros. Let me back up a little bit. So here's the get. The sysout from the get is, the normal kind of output you would see from the first one. We put out a message in our shell script that says we're going to connect using this SAS certificate, and then we actually execute the command that we're executing, the low-level command. You can see all the options. Notice in this case we're using Ported Tools SSH has its own keyring support in it now in 1.2, and we're doing that for you. And we're dealing with this tricky business that you have to have quotes around this thing, and you have to backtick quote them. It's all really kind of complicated, but we handle that in this shell script to make that work properly. Here's the input command that gets echoed out. And then this is actually a message from Cozy SFTP fetching this to, and then you can see that we are opening and closing it with a little report of how many records and bytes were written. And this final message is from the outside utility Cozy Batch saying we're exiting this step with return code 0. So these all, let's look at that last connect one. This is the one where we did an ls command right here. So the idea here, unless you have any questions, let me go back to the slide. Did that. I'll jump back in here and mention that the sample scripts that we ship, get, put, connect is actually a script that we call from the other ones, but as you saw in that last step, you can call it directly yourself. Cat is that complicated two-connection one that does a concatenation to a DD. The variables that you can set when you use these scripts are these. These are the ones related to your connection and authentication. You can either say I want to use a password dataset name pointing that has my password, or a certificate name for a SAP certificate in RACF or your security product. You can set the SFTP ops. Now notice in the installation default it's set some, so if you set these you would want to concatenate onto this variable. And then,
Kirk?
Yes, we have a question?
This is Steve. You just might want to mention that if you don't specify a password dataset name or assert, you'll get the the usual public-private key pair that you set up if you've got one set up.
Right, that's a good point. There's actually 3 ways of authenticating. One is with a password dataset name, one is with a SAP certificate. If you don't specify either of these, what you'll get is the default for Ported Tools OpenSSH, which is it will use a private key in your Unix directory if there is one. And these are variables that you can use to transfer. Now, if you look at the source code for these scripts, I'm not going to bring them up now. We can get in the weeds in a hurry. But the beginning of each of them is comments that document the variables that each of them support. I just mentioned that you can use features of Cozy Batch mixed into this that allow you to sort of integrate your job with proc and JCL variables. So you might have, set variables in your JCL, or maybe your own proc where you set JCL variables like user, host, and R file, or some combination. And you could pass those in and not set them in there. So this is just a fallout of the feature of how Cozy Batch, if you give it arguments, this gets passed in as a parm. If you give it arguments like this in the parm, it will actually set the environment variables for you from JCL variables. Now, of course, everyone knows that if you do this, you're limited to 100 characters, but if you look in the Cozy Batch User's Guide, there's actually some tricks that we support for allowing you to pass in from JCL variables, strings of stuff more than 100 characters. It's not perfect, but it works reasonably well for what we can do. Any questions on this? I'm just going to keep going. So, hopefully what we were successful in addressing some of those shortcomings, the benefits that we see in this is that some of the nasty low-level shell script logic is pulled out of your job steps, pulled out of your jobs, and into these separate script files. We have, as that one slide showed, a standard set of parameter variables that you can set before you call those shell scripts that allow you to control, what connection is, how you're going to authenticate, any options, and then the file names that you want to transfer. It allows you to separate settings for these variables in installation defaults that are concatenated in front of your shell script, and you can set that up in a proc. Different procs could point to different installation defaults. And finally, this is all stuff that you can it's provided as samples that you can customize and extend. We tried to be really clear and stick to real basic shell scripting stuff in the examples. If you look at them, that you could take that and use it to learn shell scripting a little bit more, to extend that for your own site's specific needs. And the idea all being that we hope that this allows you to kind of simplify the jobs and reduce maintenance problems by having so much stuff in every job. So, unless there are any questions, I'm going to go on to the next topic. I think, Steve, this is for you.
Okay. Before we get into the file pattern stuff, I also want to point out that, especially if you've downloaded the beta version of Cozy 2.0.0, or if you're playing around with these shell scripts that Kirk just described, if you have specific requests or enhancements that you'd like to have us make in a future release, we'd really appreciate your feedback. I mean, we covered what we thought were basic cases, put, get, this cat case. But if you have specific things that you'd like to see addressed, please give us feedback.
Yeah, let me mention one other thing. The shell scripts, we ship those in, they're in 2.0.0, but you can get them, if you're using a prior release, you can get those shell scripts and use them on a prior release. So there's really no underlying code that supports the new shell scripts in JCL. You could get that and use it on the release that you're using.
Okay, so file patterns. This is a new feature that we introduced to the toolkit. Again, this actually showed up in the 1.10 stream, but again is also available in 2.0.0. It allows for you to specify patterns, as we'll get into, to match your file names and data sets that you're putting or getting, so that you can actually automatically apply specific file transfer options based on the name of the file or data set. So previously, before we introduced this feature, all the options that you wanted to have in place for a file transfer had to be in effect prior to you actually performing the transfer, before you perform the get or the put. And you traditionally would do that with setting the option interactively, with the ls/plus command, or if you're using the Cozy client, you use the lzops command to directly affect the transfer. Or you might have done a transfer prior to this one, and you were just reusing the old options. And then we introduced a while ago these configuration files that would let you specify site-wide defaults for certain options that you wanted to set, but those defaults would apply and always applied to all the files that you transferred. So they were not really particularly targeted at any particular file name. So that was all stuff that was in Cozy previous to this file patterns feature that we've added. So what we've done now is we've extended that notion of these defaults, if you will, to allow for file transfer options to be put in force automatically based on the matching of the file that you're transferring based on a pattern that you specify in this configuration file. Now the patterns themselves are actually not very tricky. They're not what you might expect from a Unix kind of background. They're not regular expressions. They're just simply the shell pattern matching syntax, which is actually quite easy to get your hands around. You can look it up in IBM's documentation or any Unix documentation for what the syntax is, but it's pretty standard. You use a splat for a wildcard, or an asterisk for a wildcard for matching multiple characters, and so on and so forth. It's pretty straightforward. This pattern matching syntax is also equivalent to the C runtime library fnmatch, if any of you have done C programming that use it. The pattern and the options that you want to associate with that pattern are specified in the COSI configuration files. And I want to go to the next chart to talk about those again, so that we can sort of have a little bit of a background on how this stuff is done. Again, prior to this pattern feature, we have had these configuration files called config files that you can set for site-wide use in the etc SSH directory. And there were originally two files, etc SSH COSI SFTP _config, and that would let you set default options for the COSI SFTP client. And then there was a companion one, COSI SFTP _server _config, which you would use to set default options for the SFTP server component. That is the component that's activated when you connect from a remote system, using PuTTY or some other SFTP client to a ZOS system running COSI SFTP. So there's two different versions of these files. These files contain three sections. The first two were originally in the product, and the last one, pattern, we just added recently. But let's, by way of review, let's look at these three sections or stanzas that can appear in those site-wide files. The fixed section is a set of options that you want as a site to be in force for every single session, and you want to make sure that those options are not overridden by any individual user. So for example, one use of this fixed section is to set the exits that you want to have run automatically, or you, for example, want to turn off or on SMF recording. Those features typically show up in the fixed section, and no users are able to override those. In addition to the fixed section, there's also a default section where you can specify the site-wide defaults for file transfer, but individual users could override them with the interactive command or their environment variables. So for example, maybe you wanted to set as a default all files to be transferred with mode equals text as the default, rather than the normal default for SFTP, which is mode equals binary. So you would put that in the default section. Then if you wanted to transfer a binary file, individual users would do an ls/+ mode equals binary to override that default. And that all worked just fine. So the new stanza or stanza type that we've introduced in this release is called pattern : and this is where you specify that shell style pattern, and then after the pattern itself, you specify the options that you want to be put in force for that particular match. And the way this works is that once a pattern is matched, then those options that you specified are put in force for that transfer only, and then you revert back to where you were originally. So think of it as a little bit of like a one-element stack. When you match a pattern, the options that you specify are put in place, and then they're popped back off after the transfer completes. So that's the new feature that we've added. Now, in addition to having a pattern section for site-wide config files, and you can repeat this pattern section as many times as you want with as many different patterns as you want. We've also introduced or allow for copies of these files, cozy SFTP underscore config and cozy SFTP underscore server underscore config, to be placed in any individual user's home SSH directory. Okay, so you can make a copy of this file and place it in your home SSH, and individual users then can specify their own patterns, which will be given priority over the site configuration files. So if for example, if individual users have specific file transfer requirements, they can put them in their own pattern section and then override whatever was already there, or if they weren't even covered in the site files. One difference that's important is that fixed and default sections are not allowed in these user-specific files, primarily because they don't make a lot of sense. So all you can see in the user config files are the pattern sections. Okay, so let's go to the next chart, and we'll take a look at this. Okay, so here is an example, or actually here are two examples of how you might set up cozy SFTP config to do pattern matching. And this is, again, cozy SFTP config would be put in place if you're using the cozy SFTP client component of the cozy toolkit from ZOS. So here's an example. The pattern starts out with the keyword pattern followed by a colon, and then white space followed by the pattern that you want to match. And in this case, it's fairly straightforward. The // tells us that it's a data set that we're trying to match. The asterisk says match as many characters as I can until I find a dot followed by the string JCL, followed by a left banana or left parenthesis, and then another asterisk which should say match any member, and then a right parenthesis. So this is basically saying any member of any data set that ends, any data set name that ends with the word JCL, I'm going to match. And what we're doing is we're simply saying we're going to specify that when we transfer any of these files, we're going to automatically set the mode to text, irrespective of whatever the mode is currently when I issue the command. So here's a little example. Given our cozy SFTP prompt, if we issue a put command, // my.dev.jcl runj, which is the member, to the remote file runj.txt, that dataset name, my.dev.jcl runj, is going to match that pattern, and we will automatically put in place this mode equals text transfer option so that the file is transferred in text mode. That is, we go through our code page conversion for you and do the line separators that are in place. Now, I want to make a couple of comments about this. Note that the pattern is matched on the name of the file that's associated with the ZOS part of the product that we're running. So, the remote file runj.txt is not used in the match. All we do is we match on the data set that we're looking to put. Okay. Another example, using the client as well, we can set up a pattern. This is just a contrived example, but we can set up a pattern that says anytime we get anytime we match a file with the suffix .trans followed by anything, we see a data set like that, then we want to automatically allocate space for it using the space bpxwdyne argument, and we give it units and primary and secondary arguments, and then we also specify what the DCB attributes are. We want a FB recfm and an LRECL of 80. So when we do a get using our cozy SFTP client, we do a get on a remote file, and when we get that file, we specify that we want to put it in the data set //partner.trans03. That pattern is going to fire, and we will automatically allocate space if the data set doesn't already exist, and put the file in that data set. Any questions so far on how this works? Okay, so let's go to the next chart. Okay, so this is a little bit more complicated example because I want to show how the priority of these patterns is determined depending on where they're located. And this example has been changed up just a little bit to show how you would specify these options for the server side. So again, it's the cozy SFTP _server_config file for the server component. So let's look at the middle of the chart first. In etc SSH, the site-wide file etc SSH cozy SFTP _server_config, we have several patterns that we've set up. We've got a splat.zip where we want to have mode binary, splat.pax where we want to have mode binary, and then we have a generic sort of splat.txt pattern that says that any file that matches that pattern we want to give mode equals text, and we want to specify a line rule of LF. Now, this is what you would normally set up if you were transferring files typically from ZOS to a Unix workstation, right? And this might be a site-wide file. Says the line rule I want to use is the line separator I want to use is LF. So that's what you could set up for your site-wide configuration. However, as an individual user, let's say that I have a Windows workstation that I work from rather than a Unix workstation, and I might want to override that pattern, that TXT pattern, to be more suitable for my uses. So I would create in my own home directory, home.ssh. I'd make my own copy of this cozy SFTP server config file, and I'd override the pattern splat.txt, keeping mode equals text. But then I might have a different client code page to match Windows, and I would specify a different line rule to match the Windows platform where I want a CRLF rather than just the straight LF. Now again, remember the order of processing, actually we'll get into this in just a minute, but the order of processing is that the user config file is used first, and preferred. If there's no match on the user file, then we go to the site-wide file. So let's take a look at our two examples. If I'm connected from a remote client, that's this SFTP prompt, and I issue a GET to a ZOS system, and I want to get my archive.pax from the ZOS Unix System Services file system, I will match the .pax pattern and use the mode of binary when I transfer that file to my local .tar file. Likewise, when I issue a get mynotes.txt, I will match the pattern splat.txt not from the site config file but from my own custom config file, and I'll transfer that txt file to my machine using a client code page of 1252 and a line rule of CRLF. And again, note the file names that match. In this case, the patterns match the file on ZOS, not the local, or in this case the workstation file name. This is all documented, these features are documented in the user's guide. I believe it's the SFTP user's guide. I believe Appendix B. If you want more details on how this works. Okay, so let's go to the next chart. I'm just going to give you an overview of the priority of these settings, because it can be a little bit confusing in terms of where you can set your options, what order they're taken in and respected. So for client sessions, that is people using when you're using the cozy SFTP binary on ZOS, the settings are determined in the following priority order. First of all, if there are any fixed options, they are used, and they're fixed and not ever overridable, and they're taken from etc SSH cozy SFTP config. Secondly, if there's nothing there, then we look for the first matching pattern in your local Cozy SFTP config file. And by first matching pattern, I mean that you will find that the first pattern that matches lexically that's located in that config file. So if you have for example, if you have a generic pattern like splat, you probably want to put that at the end of the file so that more specific patterns will take precedent if that's what you intend. If nothing is found in the user version of the file, then we go to the system version of Cozy SFTP config and look for a matching pattern there. If nothing is found there, then we use whatever was set last with the interactive options through lzops, and then if nothing matches there, then we use the environment variable SFTP ZOS options, which you can set and have exported in your environment when you start Cozy SFTP. And then finally, as sort of a catch-all, the default section of the Cozy SFTP config file is used to fill out any options that are available. Okay, so that's the sequence. The server sequence on the next page is nearly identical to the client sequence. The only difference, of course, is the name of the file that's used. And on item number 4, of course, if you're connecting in from outside, you're going to be using the ls/plus command to set your interactive options rather than lzops. But everything else is, the sequencing and the priority is the same, so there should be no confusion about that. I do want to make one comment about dataset name matching that we do document in our user's guide, but you should be aware of. The matching algorithm is run on the name that you supply on the command, rather than what name gets resolved by ZOS after we do all the lookups. So, for example, if you specify a DD, using the Cozy SFTP client, the pattern will match on that DD name, not on the actual dataset name that DD points to. So just a word of caution about how that works. Okay, I guess that's it on patterns. Are there any questions? If not, I think we're...
Let's see. Yeah, I want to point out that on our website, if you look at the... Here's where the webinar page is that I mentioned. This points to the list of prior webinars. We'll have this session up there sometime soon, today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow. Both the slides and the full video recording. I also mentioned that if you look at our release notes on this website, they're pretty easy to find. The release notes go through, release by release, what features have been added. Yeah, we have a few minutes left, so I'd just like to open up any questions we have. I think I'll handle that one offline. Does anyone else have a question? We had some questions about PWDSN, whether or not that could point to both a dataset name or a file. I think that we will, I guess the requirement is that we might want to have it point to either a dataset name or a Unix file. I think based on the way we implemented that our simplest solution would be to have maybe another variable called PW file if we wanted to extend it that way. You could point to a Unix file that would have your password in it. Do we have any other questions? Let me see if anyone has a raised hand.
Well, Kirk's looking. I just want to. I would like to reiterate that a lot of the features that end up getting added to the product are a direct result of your input as users of the product. So if you have ideas that you'd like to see us explore, please contact us, either at info@dovetail.com, or even better, use our community forum so that other people can see what you're suggesting and provide their own comments. If you're commercial users, absolutely use the commercial ticket system to put in a request for a new feature, and we look at these very carefully.
Let's see. We had some other questions. I think I covered the URL for the PDF download. It'll be on our webinars page, right there. Yeah, we're planning on having a webinar. It's going to be after the first of the year on using SAF key rings. This is really, if you think about it, really more of a webinar on how that works with IBM Ported Tools SSH Release 1.2, which adds support for that. As you might know, we had support for SAF key rings in our product prior to that, but we're recommending that people don't use our support and that they use the IBM Ported Tools support for that. Ours was a sort of an add-on implementation in the form of an SSH agent. Still works if you're using it, but we're kind of recommending you use IBM. So this webinar is going to be showing you how to manage key rings, how to create key rings and self-signed certificates for using with SSH and SFTP. This works with RACF and ACF2 and Top Secret. I think we'll be doing well if we can explain how to cover all the different scenarios with RACF, and hopefully that'll be translatable using standard command translations to the other security products. But if you have any specific questions about that keyring webinar, it'd be really good if you could send it to us or put something on the community bulletin board. That way we can either address it or pay special attention and try to include it in the webinar. So I guess we're going to do something I don't think we've ever done before, Steve, which is we're going to end up...
It's not possible.
Yeah, we're going to end up ahead of schedule. We've got actually 7 minutes left, but if we don't have any other questions, we want to thank you all for coming, and thank you for using the product and providing us with your feedback and your business. So that's all. Thanks a lot.